Hello, and welcome back to another Warlords of Draenor boss preview. This time we're going to be having a look at Kromog. This is a really cool boss. It's actually one of those bridge bosses where the boss doesn't move, but you have to deal with a bunch of stuff. A little bit like, say, Koligarn or something like that. Now, this was filmed in LFR difficulty, however, the full set of abilities that you will find in normal and heroic mode are present, just as they are a little bit nerfed into the ground. Still, this actually does give us a really good way to just look at the boss, and I've got to say, this is actually a decently fun fight. So first of all, let's just talk about the tank mechanics and get them out of the way. The first thing that he does is called Warped Armor. This will decrease your movement speed and increase your damage taken. It stacks up to 5, so this is essentially just the usual kind of tank swap deal. He also does something called Fist of Stone, or Fists of Stone. This will do a whole bunch of damage, but interestingly, it is split between two targets within 15 yards, i.e. the two tanks. In my opinion, this is a decent enough mechanic, as it means that the off-tank has still got something to deal with, even when they are not dealing with, well, you know, main tanking the boss. So that's pretty cool. Another thing is that he will do Slam. Now this does hit the entire raid, and its damage is based on how close they are to the boss. This, of course, means that the tanks are going to feel the full effect, because they will be closest to the boss, so that's something the tanks will really have to worry about. Then finally, he does something called Stone Breath. This is a raid-wide AoE that happens from time to time, but if no one is in melee range of the boss, this will actually be, like, constantly casted until it kills just about everyone. So your tanks need to stay in melee range, and this actually does play into one of the mechanics that I will talk about in a bit. So now that the tank-related abilities have been covered, let's move on to some of the slightly more cool stuff. So he does a big old smash thing. It's called Rippling Smash, and it's just a large cone AoE. There's this big flashy effect first, and that's followed by a smaller, slower ripple effect. It's the ripple that does the damage, so that's just something that you don't want to stand in. So there's that. And then there's also reverberations. Now you'll see these, they look sort of like the stuff from, I think it was the sound-related boss in Cataclysm, the very first raid here. But these little reverberation circle disc thingies will appear from the boss and radiate outwards, and you just don't want to stand in them. Now, these things appear whenever the boss does Rippling Smash or Slam, so that's just another little thing for you to move around and deal with. So his next ability is Rune of Crushing Earth. This basically just spawns like a little rune thing underneath a player, which is fine, but then two hands will appear beside the rune, and after a certain amount of time, those hands will smash together, they'll do a whole bunch of damage to anyone who is hit, and it will also stun them. All you have to do here is not stand in it, so it's really not a very problematic ability whatsoever. Okay, so he also does something called Shattered Earth, which damages 4 players, and it's not too interesting. In fact, you'd hardly even notice it exists. It's really just something there to give the healer something else to deal with. Okay, so next, let's talk about the interesting mechanic of this fight. Often it is the case that bosses have got lots of power of the course mechanics, and then they've got one sort of cool, more defining mechanic. And for this boss, this is the defining mechanic. So it's really 2 abilities, and they both play together quite well. The first thing that he does is he casts Rune of Grasping Earth. This will cause a whole bunch of runes to spawn on the ground, little small ones. And after a few seconds, anyone who is standing inside those runes will be grabbed by this big stone hand. And while they are grabbed, they will take reduced damage from other sources, but they will suffer an AoE. Not an AoE, a damage over time. So, that's what's going on there. If 2 players stand inside the same rune, though, it's only going to grab 1 player. So you will want to be coordinated, because believe me, you do want to be grabbed by these. Now, this mechanic is basically just designed to allow people to deal with the next mechanic, which is Thundering Blows. As always, bosses seem to give you something which will allow you to survive the thing they're just about to do. Thundering Blows is basically just the boss slamming the ground, doing a whole bunch of damage to anyone who is not inside one of those hands, and then it also knocks them up so high in the air that the fall will kill them. Now then, all you do here is you make sure you're inside a hand, then you will survive the Thundering Blow damage. After Thundering Blows has been finished, then you just kill your hand to break out of it and go back to killing the boss. It's a pretty cool little thing. Now, tanks, of course, will have to rush right back to the boss as soon as possible, or else that Stone Breath thing that I talked about earlier will start to damage the entire raid. Alright, so finally, the thing that he will do at 30% is a Slight Frenzy. This just increases his damage and attack speed by 20%, and also causes him to cast his abilities a little bit more often. Frankly though, it's not a massive problem, it's, just your usual kind of thing. But I would imagine that the final 30% will be pretty hectic on the higher difficulty levels. Overall, I think this is quite a good boss, though. There's lots of stuff for you to watch out for and move from, which I think is pretty good. And that ability with, you know, the hands grabbing people and then allowing you to survive the thundering blows is really cool in my opinion. And I like how there's going to be a little bit of coordination needed to make sure that people aren't all going to be standing inside the same rune and, you know, just so they don't kill the raid by doing that. Yeah, it's cool. So this is another solid boss. Can't wait to try him out in the harder difficulties, but certainly LFR has given me a little bit of hope for it. You know, it's funny actually doing these on LFR. You do get a decent enough idea of how the boss sort of will play out in terms of its mechanics, and even on LFR with the mechanics being neutered a little bit, I still found this to be a fight that didn't make me fall asleep instantly, and I suppose that is a good thing. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.